planned to film this video while I was in Italy, but it went a little something like this. I thought it would be super romantic filming in the countrysides of Italy, but it was loud and there were people talking and there were cats and birds running around. Also, I got a little anxious filming outside, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna get better at that. So I thought living in Europe would be a little bit different than what it really is like. And it's amazing, don't get me wrong. There are so many beautiful plus points to it, like this and this and this and this and this, but it's not all that we romanticize it to be, at least in Australia. I think the modern West at least has this sort of Eurocentric romanticization, which is sort of fed to us by film and TV. And now that I actually live here, I feel like I can speak on it. So this is what it's really like to live in Europe as an Australian. Hi, my name's Kay Robson and I am an Australian originally from Sydney living in Germany. I live on the west side of Germany in a beautiful city called Cologne. It's got about 1 million inhabitants. It's the 4th largest city in Germany and it's known for its carnival, which just happened last week, its nightlife and this grotty place. I've lived here for about a year now, and if you want to hear more about that, you can watch my previous video where I talked about why on earth I moved to Germany in the first place. And to be fair, I've only lived in Germany so far. I've traveled around Europe in the past and seen quite a few places, but I've never lived anywhere in Europe other than Germany. So my view, disclaimer, is tainted of course by my experience of living in Germany. And I think to generalize Europe in the first place is kind of difficult because there are so many countries within Europe that have unique cultures, unique languages, and completely unique experiences in terms of living there. That said, I am Australian, and in Australia we often kind of do generalize Europe. Like, we talk about Europe just in general without knowing ever much about the specific countries and cultures within. That said, in this video I will be referring to Europe, the continent, or more specifically the EU, because I'm living on mainland Europe now and most of the countries surrounding are part of the EU. And if I do say anything that's incorrect or misinformation in this video, please feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm just a mere Australian from far, far away, and I definitely don't know everything about Europe. I definitely haven't experienced enough to have like a full solid understanding on the dynamics between countries, the history of it all. I have only been living here for a year and therefore can only speak on my experience so far. So let's get into it. If you are new here, please feel free to subscribe down below. And if you've already watched my videos before and are subscribed, hello and welcome back. So I think first of all, it's kind of funny to discuss this idea of the romanticization of Europe. I'm not sure if other countries do it. Maybe the US does it as well, but there's definitely a sentiment in Australia that sort of romanticizes Europe. A lot of Australians go to Europe around June to August, so when it's summertime in Europe and when Europe is at its peak tourism, with like often beautiful weather and people out and about living their best lives. But I know that amongst many, particularly young people in Australia, we romanticize Europe as a place not only for holiday destinations, but for culture and art and history and life. And it's funny because the more I live here, the more I realize that particularly Germans do the opposite with Australia. So they romanticize Australia as not only a holiday destination, but like the lifestyle, this easygoing nature with beautiful wildlife and all of the other things that Australia has to offer. And it's true, Australia is a beautiful place as well. But I think when people spend more time in Australia, they also realize that Australia has its own problems, particularly politically. And in terms of our colonial history, there is so much healing that needs to be done still in Australia. And there are still so many problematic things happening every day, especially within our government. And sometimes I even find it hard to be Australian or to identify as Australian, because being Australian is inherently problematic, especially if you're white. But that's a whole other topic that's maybe for another video. But I think then we can flip it the other way around. So many Australians view Europe as, yeah, this place to eat themselves silly, to drink wine and sit in the sun enjoying Aperols, or walking the streets of Rome, experiencing Fashion Week in Paris, coming to Germany to drink a good beer, or going to Spain and Portugal to lie on the coast in the sun. And a lot of Australians do that. We come to Europe for a very expensive holiday where it can cost minimum 2,000 to 3,000 euros for a couple of weeks. And I think this is definitely class-based, and not everyone has the privilege, of course, to travel or to even think about traveling to Europe. But I think Europe is sold as a place you want to be, a place you want to go to visit and experience. It's a place of history, castles, museum, architecture, fashion, art, and sophistication. And in many ways it's idealized civilized to be a place where you can live a different lifestyle, be anyone who you want to be, and indulge in pleasures that you might not get in Australia. And while I was traveling here, I actually did have that sort of experience. I hopped from place to place throughout Europe and ate food, went out clubbing, and did all the touristy things in terms of learning about history and culture. And it was nice. It was a really, really cool experience. But living here is a totally different concept. Actually building your life here, not only like integrating, even though that's kind of like a buzzword these days in terms of immigration, which I feel weird about, but in terms of not only having to integrate with the culture, but also to set your life up and figure out how the systems work here, what the norms are, and how people operate. It's a very different thing. And as much fun as it is to have all of these adventures in terms of meeting new people, experiencing the new ways of doing things, it can also be pretty overwhelming and pretty shocking. I'm sad to say that it's not all just drinking Aperol and lying in the sun and flirting with some cute French man. Sure, there's some of that. I mean, like, I don't do much of the first or the last thing because I don't drink alcohol and I'm gay, but you know, there is still some of that if you go looking for it. But I think this whole expectation around what Europe is like is really not the reality. Let's be real. Once those rose-colored glasses come off, you start to see a place or a people for what it really is, which might be different to your expectation. And in my case, it has been, and it shocked me quite a lot. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here or bring down the mood, but I'm just saying, like, Europe is a complicated place, and the reality of living here is a little bit more complicated than what you might expect. First of all, I think the thing that shocked me the most was that there are so many people living in Europe. According to Google, there are around 750 million people living in Europe at this time, and 448 million of those people live in the EU. And to give you some context, if I put a map of Australia over the EU, it looks a little something like this. Australia is bigger than the EU, and there are 20 million people living in Australia. So in the EU, there are 448 million people living there. And in Australia, which is bigger, there are 26 million people. So in Europe, there are 17 times as many people, even though Australia is bigger. And I think that that's something that has kind of shocked my brain and overwhelmed my system a bit. Like, I grew up in Sydney, which has a population of almost 6 million people. So there are actually more people living in that city than in the one I'm living right now. But I think just when I found out that there are so many people living in Europe, it scared the shit out of me. I think living in a European city also can make you feel a little bit squished in because everybody's living in an apartment. It's these like classic 5-story European buildings of apartments stacked right next to each other. You're literally living on top of each other. Like, maybe there's someone sitting on the other side of that wall right now and I don't know. And that's just normal here if you live in the city. Everyone's kind of on top of each other. So maybe that contributes to the feeling of feeling cramped in. But yeah, that's the first thing, the population in general. I think also Germany, which has a population of something like 88 million, is smaller than New South Wales, which is the state that I grew up in Australia. And for me, that just like blows my mind. Does anyone also feel a little bit overwhelmed by the population? The other thing is the lifestyle. Not only as an Australian, of course, I've had to adapt to the weather, the fact that Australia is super, super hot for most of the year, and Germany is super, super cold for most of the year. I've also had to adapt to German attitudes, like this whole European attitude of working to live rather than living to work. And I've definitely noticed a difference between like Australian and Sydney capitalism compared to the general attitude here. Like, obviously people are working and people have to work to live, but it often is just a matter of that. People, I find, don't place as much self-worth and value in their jobs here. Like, why would you want to work 5 days a week? At least in Germany, it's more normal to study for longer. So a lot of people are doing masters until they're 26, 27, and then they go into full-time work. But in Australia, many of my friends started working full-time at 23, and that was kind of expected. Like, I'm 25 now and I'm doing my masters, and I think for Australia, that's kind of a little later. A lot of the people I know are working full-time and already well and truly into their careers. And that has definitely made me feel a little bit bad about myself and made me compare. But in Europe, it's totally normal. Like, a lot of people have said to me in Germany, like, yeah, you're 25. Of course you're still studying, which takes a lot of the pressure off. So I kind of like that attitude here. The other things are like the bike culture in Germany is really huge. The coffee culture here is hilarious. And I mean, this is something that we sort of have in Sydney too, but I think it's more about like brunch culture or drinks culture or beach culture, and there are definitely some differences there. I was gonna make a whole separate video about this, but in terms of like the German coffee date, I found it so funny. I've gotten so into coffee since being here, especially because I work as a barista now, but people really use cafes here as a way to not only like have a place to go in winter where they can meet up with friends and socialize, but just all throughout the year. It's a place to go and do an activity, to really be like, we're going to get a coffee and we're going to sit here and chat for hours about everything. And in terms of the conversations that I have with Germans here, like, wow, we get deep, like we get through the topics. Yeah, maybe it's a difference between like the Australian lifestyle or attitude or norms or something, but I definitely don't remember like talking so intensely on my Australian coffee dates, if I ever went to them, which was kind of rare. The other thing is like the language richness here is incredible. Living in this city, I hear so many different languages every single day, not just German, but Eastern European languages, Middle Eastern languages. I think in Sydney also it's more common to hear a range of different Asian languages, so I'm much more familiar with hearing those. But here I'm hearing languages that I didn't in Sydney. And the diversity in terms of how easily it is for people to travel across land and travel through Europe and live in different places. And with so much immigration into Germany, it's amazing to experience here and witness such a vibrancy of culture here. That said though, I think that brings us to, for me, the most shocking and even sometimes scary difference here is that right-wing populism and the rise of right-wing extremism and far-right politics is a real threat here. I mean, already 6 EU countries, Italy, Finland, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, have all already had hard right parties in government. And right-wing sentiment has been on the rise in general in Europe over the last few years. Last year, we especially saw how strong the far right is in France, with Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party winning the votes in the French legislative elections last year. But they came in third in terms of seats due to France's voting system. And now Germany's far-right party, the Alternative für Deutschland, so the AfD, just won 20% in the federal election. If you want to read more about it, you can read any of these articles. I'll link them in the video description below. But even living in a very left-wing city, in fact, the city which had the lowest vote for the AfD in the whole country, there is still so much fear for the far right and for fascists, which are a real threat to this country at the moment. And it's happening not just in Germany, it's happening in Italy, France, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and all around. And in Australia, although our politics are not perfect and we 100% have a long way to go in terms of justice, including and especially for our First Nations people, this far-right threat doesn't seem to be as prominent. And it's certainly something that has captured my attention since living here. And I think that brings me to my final point that I think shocks me the most, is that Australia actually is really irrelevant. Like I said, most people see Australia here as a holiday destination, as somewhere with a beautiful coast and lots of places to swim. And it's true, it is that. But Australia has been the center of my world and my focus for the last 20 years. And of course I came to intertwine myself with news and politics and opinions in Australia. And the current affairs in Australia were what occupied my mind. But coming here, I see now, and I've gained some perspective on just how big the world is. And obviously with so many people living in Europe, Australia kind of is just that country that's in the corner of the world that like is a nice place to go to, but other than that, people don't talk about it much. It's been kind of a humbling experience to know that where I come from like doesn't really matter. Like it does obviously in terms of all of the people living in Australia and its position in current affairs and world affairs and I don't know. But still, yeah, it's been a humbling experience to come somewhere where your home feels pretty irrelevant. And that brings me on to the next bit, which is what I love most about living in Europe. So despite all of these shocking factors and things I didn't expect, what do I love about living in Europe? Is it worth it? Why am I here if there are such big issues? Well, I think as I said before, even with so much going on in the world at the moment and the fact that a lot of it can be depressing and overwhelming and make us feel hopeless, there are still many things about life here that excite me and that bring me hope and that fulfill me with a sense of adventure. First of all, like I said, the lifestyle is pretty attractive. I think especially in the circle that I operate in here, there's not such a capitalistic mindset. Sydney kind of felt overwhelming sometimes. Like I should be working a full-time job. I should have my career sorted. I should be saving for a house. I should be getting my life together. And I was working towards that a lot, but I think I didn't realize that it put so much pressure on me, and it put pressure on me to want things that I didn't necessarily even want. It was just society telling me that I needed to have those things. Especially as a queer person, I think that it's always been hard to fit into society's guidelines of what a life, or what I should make my life look like. And getting some distance between that capitalistic mindset in Sydney and more of a socialist sort of perspective here, and an even more left-wing circle, that pressure to perform and to achieve has been significantly reduced in my life. I've been seeing life less as something something to spend working, but something to spend living. Spending it having conversations with people who interest me, sharing my experience and learning from theirs, eating good food, drinking nice coffee, going for nice walks, spending my days really nicely, trying to indulge a little bit more in what life has to offer. Here as a young person, it's about political engagement, it's about having fun, it's about celebrating cultural richness and diversity, and making the most of my days rather than spending them working 5 days a week. And that's been really relieving. It's taken a while to unlearn a lot of the things that obviously I've spent much of my adult life learning in Sydney, but I'm starting to gain a new perspective, and I think that that's going to hopefully last a lifetime. Another thing that I appreciate about living in Europe is that everything is so close. I was on the east coast of Italy last week, and it only took an hour to fly there, plus some driving to and from the airport. And I've also been to Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Berlin, and Italy twice in the last year just for short trips at pretty affordable prices. As an Australian, that is such a dream to be able to access so many iconic cities in the space of an hour. The other thing that is nice about living in Europe is the fact that the cost of living is a little bit cheaper. Actually, these days, living in Germany is almost as expensive as living in Sydney, which is kind of wild. Like, rents are really expensive here, and inflation has meant that even food and drink cost quite a lot here now, but still there's free education and affordable healthcare. Like, I'm studying my master's now without having to pay tuition fees, and I'm part of the public healthcare system here. So I have to pay as a student something like 140 euros per month, but included in that is a range of healthcare services like doctors, dentists, dermatologists, psychologists, etc. are included within that. So the education system and the healthcare system is certainly much more affordable here. Another thing is that the 4 seasons are really nice to experience here. We've just come out of winter, it's the start of spring, and I can already feel it warming up. The sun's coming out, the birds are chirping, and the blue skies are starting to appear. Winter was difficult for sure, but it also brought coziness and Christmas and winter fashion and style and coffee dates, and summer and autumn will bring in their own energy. So it's really nice experiencing those distinct 4 seasons here, which in Australia, those 4 seasons just don't fit. There are indigenous cultures in Australia that have named 6 seasons in the year, which make much more sense for Australia because we have a whole different climate there. So autumn, summer, winter, spring kind of don't make sense for Australia, but these 6 seasons of cooling to drying and heating periods make much more sense. And I'll link that in the video description below for your interest as well. And there are so many other things that I like about living in Europe, things that I still haven't discovered as well. I love my friends here, I love my life here, I love having the experience of living somewhere else, and living in Europe still is really special. Of course, I think your experience of living in Europe is totally dependent on where you live and how much money you earn, how privileged you are, etc. And I know that as a white person, my experience of living in Germany has been privileged already, and I'm very grateful for all of the people here that have taken me in and been kind to me, and for all of the experiences that I've had so far. That said, let's get on to the final part, which is what I miss about Australia, seeing as we're doing a cute little cross-cultural comparison here. Well, I think the first thing that's the most obvious is the weather. I mean, come on. Even though it's nice experiencing the seasons here, I do miss being warm all the time and the sun being out most days. Australia experiences weather extremes, that's for sure. It's either pouring with rain or ridiculously hot, but I miss the warmth and I miss the ocean. I would kill to be able to be that close to the ocean again. The ocean was my safe space, and being able to go for a swim regularly in such a beautiful sea was something that I can appreciate now here even more, and I miss that 100%. When I go back to visit Australia in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be swimming every day, best believe it. Another thing I miss is the friendliness of the people there. No disrespect, Germany, but Germans are known for being a little bit direct, serious, and cold in comparison to Australians who are known for being super casual, super friendly, and really open and easygoing. And I miss that, and I'm excited to go and experience it again. Similarly, I miss Aussie humor so much. Sometimes my banter and sarcasm that's very Australian doesn't always translate well in Europe, and that's a little difficult to navigate. Like, I wonder if I'm becoming a more serious person by living in Germany, but I definitely have to pick my jokes a little more carefully here. I also really miss good Asian food. Sydney has the most incredible option of a variety of Asian foods, and I miss having those options at the door. And I also miss brunch culture in Sydney. Like, we have such good brunch food, and I miss having a good abalone toast knows? The other thing I miss about Australia is the fact that there's less bureaucracy. German bureaucracy particularly has been a bit of a nightmare to navigate. And when you add a language barrier on top of that, a lot of it has been really difficult. Plus, I speak pretty good German and I have lots of close German contacts who can help me with things. So I can't imagine how difficult it is for people who don't feel confident in German. And similarly, the language barrier can leave you feeling left out in general, just of conversations or culture, especially in group situations. When other people are speaking German, I find it really hard to participate and I'm often left with a feeling of exclusion even when people don't mean to. That's something I really would never take for granted again, just the fact of being able to constantly understand and always being understood. That's something I miss for sure. I also miss the wildlife in Australia. It sounds funny, but like the kangaroos and the sounds of kookaburras or spotting a possum every now and then, like I even miss Australian spiders and snakes. Australia is such a special country and it has so much richness in terms of the environment and the longest living culture in the world. And even though that's complicated, I miss the connection there. It's that expat feeling of having two homes but also not feeling like you belong in either of them anymore. That's kind of difficult. And it brings me on to my last point of what I think I miss the most, which is of course my family and my friends. And that, yeah, sometimes even with the time zone, it's super hard to keep in touch, and when life keeps going on and we keep on living it, it's hard to stay in each other's lives. Even when I have the best intentions and my friends and family have the best intentions, it's hard to always keep up. And it was certainly a choice for me to move away from that, and something that I still carry with a very heavy heart. So that brings us to the end of the video and to the question of, will I stay long term in Europe? Well, if you want to find the answer out to that, you can watch this video here. But in summary, yeah, I'm gonna stay a little bit longer. Even though it's definitely hard being away from home and that I miss Australia sometimes with all of my heart, I still love living here. Europe is a pretty special place, and even though there are so many people here and it will continue to overwhelm me every day, it's full of life and culture and food and richness and diversity, and I think that that's one of the greatest things about Europe. There are so many people that live here, there is so much going on, and I am grateful to be a part of it. So many adventures to be had. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next video. Cheers!
So girls moving around. If you see your main dog, get the brother a pound and just come on, just breathe, stop, for real, and give it what you got, just